She is a drunk and a disgrace to this family, Your Honor. She cannot be trusted with a single dollar, let alone a multi-million-dollar estate. My stepmother didn't even flinch as she said it. She sat there in her black Chanel suit, dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, performing grief like she'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror, which, knowing her, she probably had. I didn't react. I didn't clench my fists. I didn't shake my head. I just sat in my chair, hands folded, breathing slowly, watching the second hand on the courtroom clock tick forward. 14 seconds. That's how long it would take for her lawyer to finish his next sentence. And after that, every word out of their mouths would be digging their own grave. Be honest with me. Have you ever sat across from someone who stole everything from you and smiled while doing it? Someone who looked a judge in the eye and lied so convincingly that even you almost believed it? Drop a comment if you know that feeling. I want to know how many of us have survived it. My name is Jenna. I'm 31 years old. And 2 years ago, my father died of pancreatic cancer in a hospital bed in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was 63. He was a good man. He built a commercial real estate company from nothing, owned 14 properties across 3 states, and left behind an estate worth roughly $11 million. He also left behind a second wife named Diane, a woman he married 4 years before he died, and me, his only biological child. The daughter Diane had spent every waking moment trying to erase. The courtroom was packed. Diane had made sure of that. She'd invited my father's business partners, his golf buddies, her book club friends, even my father's elderly sister, my Aunt Caroline, who sat in the third row looking confused and heartbroken. Diane wanted an audience for my humiliation. She wanted witnesses who would later tell everyone that poor Jenna had fallen apart, that the drinking had gotten so bad she couldn't even string a sentence together in court. But I wasn't falling apart. I was counting. Your Honor, Diane's lawyer said. A man named Philip Crane who wore a $4,000 watch and a smile that made my skin crawl. We are here today because my client has grave concerns about the management of the late Richard Weston's estate. Since his passing, the primary beneficiary, his daughter Jenna, has demonstrated a pattern of erratic behavior, financial irresponsibility, and substance abuse that puts the entire estate at risk. We are requesting an emergency conservatorship to protect the assets before there is nothing left to protect. Diane squeezed out another tear. She reached across the aisle and touched my Aunt Caroline's hand, as if to say, I'm doing this for him. For Richard. I watched my aunt pat Diane's fingers and nod. It made me sick, but I didn't show it. In psychology, there's a concept called the gray rock technique. When you're dealing with someone who feeds on your emotions, someone who needs your anger or your tears to feel powerful, you become a rock. Flat, boring, unresponsive. You give them nothing. You starve them. Diane needed me to scream. She needed me to stand up and call her a liar so she could point at me and say, see? She's unstable. She's out of control. So I gave her silence. And my silence was not surrender. It was surveillance. Miss Weston, Judge Patricia Callahan said, peering at me over her reading glasses. These are very serious allegations. Before we proceed, do you understand what's being requested here? I do, Your Honor, I said. My voice was calm, low, even. I understand perfectly. Diane shifted in her seat. She had expected sobbing. She had expected the flask she'd planted in my purse to fall out when I stood up. She didn't know I'd found it that morning and left it in the car. Then let's hear the evidence, the judge said. Philip Crane stood up and buttoned his jacket. He walked to the bench carrying a thick manila folder and began laying out the case against me like a surgeon displaying instruments before an operation. First, Your Honor, the financial records. He opened the folder. Since Richard Weston's death 22 months ago, over $1. $2 million has been withdrawn or transferred from the estate's primary operating accounts. The disbursements are erratic. Large cash withdrawals, wire transfers to entities we cannot identify. And most troubling, he paused for effect. The beneficiary has made no effort to account for any of it. A murmur went through the courtroom. I saw my Aunt Caroline's face tighten with worry. One of my father's old partners leaned over and whispered something to the man next to him. Second, Philip continued, the personal conduct. He pulled out a stack of photographs and handed them to the judge. They show Miss Weston in various states of what we believe to be intoxication. At a gas station at 2 a.m., leaving a bar alone on a Tuesday afternoon, purchasing large quantities of alcohol at a liquor store. I looked at the photos as the judge examined them. I remembered every single one of those moments. The gas station at 2 a.m. was the night I drove 3 hours to meet a forensic accountant who would only see me off hours because he was afraid of Diane's lawyer. The bar on a Tuesday was a meeting with a private investigator who used that location as his office. The liquor store receipt was for a charity auction I was organizing for my father's favorite nonprofit. But out of context, in black and white, printed on glossy paper, they looked exactly like what Diane wanted them to look like. A woman falling apart. And third, Philip said, lowering his voice for maximum effect, the testimony of the family. He gestured to Diane, who stood up slowly, smoothing her skirt. Diane walked to the witness stand like she was walking to a funeral. She pressed her hand against her chest and looked at the judge with those wide, wounded eyes that had fooled my father for 4 years. Richard was my everything, she began, her voice cracking. When he got sick, I gave up my career to take care of him. I was at his bedside every single day for 11 months. And before he died, he looked at me and said, "Take care of Jenna. She's fragile. She's always been fragile." That was a lie. My father never said that. My father's last words to me, spoken when Diane had stepped out to take a phone call, were, "The safe behind the painting. The combination is your mother's birthday. Don't let her find it. Everything you need is in there." Diane continued. After the funeral, Jenna changed. She stopped returning my calls. She moved out of the family home into a tiny apartment on the east side. She quit her job at the firm. She started disappearing for days at a time. I tried to help her. I tried to get her into treatment, but she pushed me away. She dabbed her eyes again. I love that girl like she's my own daughter, and it breaks my heart to be here. But someone has to protect Richard's legacy before she destroys it. The courtroom was quiet. I could feel the sympathy shifting toward Diane like a tide being pulled by the moon. She was good. She was very good. But she wasn't better than me. "Miss Weston," Judge Callahan said, "you've heard the allegations. You've seen the evidence. What is your response?" I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't fumble with papers. I picked up a single red folder that had been sitting on the table in front of me since the hearing began. My lawyer, a woman named Grace Chen, gave me a small nod. "I have a response, Your Honor," I said. "But first, I'd like to ask my stepmother one question." The judge considered this, then nodded. "Go ahead." I turned to Diane. She met my eyes with that same practiced warmth, that same mask of concern. But underneath it, I could see the flicker, the calculation, the predator assessing whether the prey was about to run or fight. "Diane," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, "what is Meridian Property Group?" The flicker became a flash. Just for a second, her pupils dilated, her fingers tightened on the armrest, and her mouth opened a fraction of an inch before she caught herself. "I don't know what that is," she said. I nodded slowly. "I thought you might say that." I walked to the bench and placed the red folder in front of Judge Callahan. "Your Honor," I said, "my stepmother is correct about one thing. The money is gone. $1. $2 million has left the estate accounts over the past 22 months. I watched every dollar leave." Diane's lawyer stood up. "She admits it, Your Honor. She's confirming our case." "I wasn't finished," I said, not raising my voice, not even looking at him. I let him sit back down. "The money didn't vanish because I was drunk or incompetent," I continued. "It vanished because someone was stealing it. And I needed to find out who, how, and most importantly, I needed to make sure they couldn't talk their way out of it." Judge Callahan opened the folder. The first page was a corporate registry filing from the state of Delaware. "Meridian Property Group," I explained, "was incorporated 11 months ago. It's a shell company. The registered agent is a law firm in Wilmington that specializes in anonymous business structures, but the beneficial owner, the person who actually controls the company and receives its funds," I pointed to the highlighted line on the page, "is Diane Patricia Weston, my stepmother." Diane stood up. "That's a fabrication. Please sit down, Mrs. Weston," the judge said sharply. Diane sat. I continued. "Over the past 22 months, $1.2 million was siphoned from the estate through a series of wire transfers disguised as property management fees, maintenance costs, and consulting invoices. Every single one of those payments went to Meridian Property Group, which means every single one of those payments went directly to Diane." I turned to the next page in the folder. "But she didn't stop there, Your Honor. I also found that Diane has been systematically inflating the maintenance costs on my father's rental properties, pocketing the difference. She replaced the property management company my father used for 15 years with a new firm. That firm is also owned by Meridian Property Group. She has been paying herself to manage the estate she was stealing from. The courtroom erupted. Aunt Caroline stood up, her hand over her mouth. Philip Crane was flipping through his own files, his face pale. Diane was whispering furiously to him, but he wasn't whispering back. He was frozen. Why? Judge Callahan asked, raising her hand to quiet the room. If you knew this was happening, why didn't you stop it immediately? This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment that would determine whether Diane got a slap on the wrist or something much worse. Because I needed the pattern, Your Honor, I said. I looked directly at Diane. When I first discovered the missing funds 14 months ago, the total was $180,000. I could have gone to the police. I could have filed a civil suit. But my lawyers advised me that at that level, with the way she had structured the payments to look like legitimate business expenses, the most likely outcome was a civil settlement. She would pay a fine, maybe return some of the money, and walk away with her reputation intact. She would still be named in my father's will. She would still have a claim on the estate. I paused, so I made a decision. I disabled the fraud alerts on the accounts. I stopped reviewing the monthly statements. I let her believe she was getting away with it. Because every month she stole, the evidence got stronger. The paper trail got longer, and the total climbed from a civil dispute into federal criminal territory. The courtroom was dead silent. $1.2 million in fraudulent wire transfers across state lines? I said. That's wire fraud. Multiple counts. The transfers went through banks in North Carolina, Delaware, and New York. That's interstate commerce. That triggers federal jurisdiction. I closed the folder. I didn't lose $1.2 million, Diane. I invested it. That was the price of your indictment. Diane's face had gone gray. She looked like a person who had just realized that the door she'd been walking through was the entrance to a cage. But she wasn't done. People like Diane are never done. She grabbed Philip's arm and whispered something. Philip hesitated, then pulled a document from his briefcase. He stood up slowly, trying to reassemble his composure. Your Honor, Philip said, his voice strained. Even if these allegations about Meridian are true, and we contest them vigorously, they are irrelevant to the matter at hand. We have here a signed amendment to the estate plan, executed by Richard Weston himself, 3 weeks before his death. It grants Diane Weston co-trustee status over all estate assets and gives her authority to make disbursements at her discretion. He handed the document to the judge. Diane's confidence came surging back. She straightened in her chair. She looked at me with something close to pity. Richard wanted me to manage the estate, she said softly, playing to the gallery again. He knew Jenna wasn't ready. He told me himself. I looked at the document. I recognized it. 3 weeks before my father died, when he was on a morphine drip and could barely keep his eyes open, Diane had put a pen in his hand and guided his signature onto a stack of papers she said were insurance forms. I had walked in at the end, seen the papers, and said nothing. I had been too grief-stricken to fight. That was the moment that started the war. Judge Callahan examined the signature. She frowned. This appears to be authentic, she said. It is his signature, I confirmed. Diane's eyes widened with surprise. She hadn't expected me to agree. My father did sign that document, I continued, 3 weeks before he died. While he was on 60 milligrams of OxyContin every 4 hours and a morphine PCA pump, I have his complete medical records right here. Grace handed me a second folder. I placed it on the bench. North Carolina Statute 31 to 5.1 requires that a person signing an estate amendment must have testamentary capacity, I said. That means they must understand the nature and extent of their property, the people who would naturally inherit, and the effect of the document they are signing. My father, at the time of that signature, had a blood oxygen level of 88% and was experiencing documented episodes of confusion and hallucination. His attending physician, Dr. Sarah Okafor, will testify that he lacked capacity. Philip Crane sat down heavily. He didn't even try to object. But even without the capacity argument, I added, the document itself is problematic. I pointed to the notary stamp on the last page. This was notarized by Linda Faye Prescott. Miss Prescott is, coincidentally, Diane's personal assistant. She is not a licensed notary in the state of North Carolina. Her commission expired 14 months before this document was signed, which makes this notarization invalid, which makes this amendment unenforceable. Diane was shaking her head. No, that's not right. Linda was definitely. Mrs. Weston, the judge interrupted. I strongly advise you to stop talking. But Diane couldn't stop. That was her weakness. She had spent so long controlling every conversation, every narrative, every room she walked into, that she didn't know how to be quiet when quiet was the only thing that could save her. "She set me up," Diane said, her voice rising. "She's been planning this. She let me take the money. She wanted me to take it. This whole thing is entrapment." I said nothing. I didn't need to. The word entrapment hung in the air, and every person in that courtroom understood what it meant. She had just admitted, in front of a judge, that she took the money. Then something happened that I did not expect. My Aunt Caroline stood up. Caroline was 74 years old. She had known Diane for 4 years and had believed every word Diane had ever told her. She was the person Diane called first after the funeral. The person Diane cried to on the phone every Sunday night. The person who had looked at me with suspicion for the past 2 years because Diane had told her I was an alcoholic. Caroline walked to the front of the courtroom. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "I owe my niece an apology," she said. Diane's face contorted. "I believed you," Caroline said, looking at Diane. "I believed every word. When you told me Jenna was drinking, I believed it. When you told me she was wasting Richard's money, I believed it. When you told me Richard wanted you to run the estate, I believed that too." She paused. "But I just heard you say, in this courtroom, that she let you take the money. That means you took it. That means everything you told me was a lie." Caroline turned to me. Her eyes were wet. "I'm sorry, Jenna. Your father would be ashamed of me for not seeing it sooner." She sat down. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not anger, not triumph, just grief. A deep, exhausted grief for the years I had spent fighting this woman alone. For the holidays I had missed because Diane had told the family I was too drunk to come. For the nights I had spent in that tiny apartment, poring over bank statements until 3 a.m., wondering if any of it would matter. I blinked hard. I took a breath. And then I delivered the final blow. "One more thing, Your Honor," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out a third folder. I walked it to the bench. After discovering Diane's theft, I conducted a full audit of the estate's real property holdings. During that audit, I found that Diane had taken out a $2.1 million line of credit against my father's flagship property, the Weston Commerce Center on Tryon Street. She used the property as collateral without authorization and without informing the estate. I let that sink in. The bank that issued that line of credit was First Atlantic Savings. When Diane defaulted on payments 3 months ago, the note went into distress. The bank put it up for sale. I looked at Diane. I bought it. Her mouth opened. "I own the note on the Weston Commerce Center," I said, "which means I own the debt secured against it. I also purchased, through a blind trust, the mortgage note on 1847 Lakeview Drive. That is Diane's personal residence, the house my father bought her as a wedding gift. The house she has been living in rent-free while stealing from his estate." I set down the final document. "You came here to take control of my life?" I said. "You're leaving as my debtor. I own your home. I own the building you leveraged. And in approximately 90 seconds, you are going to learn what it feels like when the life you stole gets repossessed." Diane was hyperventilating. Philip Crane had his head in his hands. The gallery was completely still. Judge Callahan closed the folders, stacked them neatly, and removed her glasses. "Based on the evidence presented today," she said, "the petition for emergency conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of the fraudulent wire transfers, the forged estate amendment, and the unauthorized encumbrance of estate property to the District Attorney's Office and to the United States Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina." She looked at Diane. "Mrs. Weston, I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel before you leave this building." The gavel came down like a thunderclap. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and 2 federal agents walked in. They weren't dramatic about it. They didn't draw weapons or shout. They just walked straight to Diane's table and stood on either side of her. "Diane Patricia Weston," the taller one said. Diane looked up at him. For the first time since I'd known her, she had nothing to say. "You're being taken into custody pursuant to a sealed federal indictment. You have the right to remain silent." She did not go quietly. She screamed. She pointed at me. She called me a snake, a liar, a monster. She told the agents I had set her up. She told the judge it was all fabricated. She grabbed at Philip's jacket and begged him to do something. But Philip was already packing his briefcase and refusing to make eye contact. As they led her past me, she stopped. The agents paused. "Your father would be disgusted by you," she hissed. I looked at her. For the first time in 2 years, I let my face show something. Not anger, not satisfaction, sadness. My father told me you would say that, I said quietly. He also told me where to find the safe. Her face collapsed. She knew exactly which safe I was talking about. She had spent months searching for it after he died. She had torn apart his study, his bedroom, his office. She had never found it. Because it was behind the painting she never liked, the one of my mother she had tried to throw away 3 times. Inside that safe was the original, unaltered will. A handwritten letter from my father documenting his concerns about Diane. Bank statements she didn't know he had been keeping. And a USB drive containing recordings of conversations where Diane discussed, in detail, her plans to drain the estate. My father knew. He had known for at least a year before he died. He didn't confront her because he was too sick to fight. But he armed me with everything I would need to win. The agents walked Diane out of the courtroom. Nobody followed her. Nobody spoke on her behalf. Philip Crane left through a side door. The gallery sat in stunned silence. Aunt Caroline found me in the hallway afterward. She didn't say anything at first. She just put her arms around me and held on like she was trying to squeeze 2 years of guilt into a single hug. "How did you do it?" she whispered. "How did you sit there all that time and let everyone think you were falling apart?" I thought about that question for a long time. "Because Dad taught me that the loudest person in the room is usually the weakest," I said. "And because I knew that the only way to beat someone like Diane was to let her believe she'd already won." Caroline wiped her eyes. "I'm going to call your cousins," she said. "They need to know the truth." I nodded. But I wasn't thinking about my cousins. I wasn't thinking about the money or the properties or the indictment. I was thinking about the last time I saw my father alive. The way he reached for my hand with fingers that had no strength left. The way his voice rattled when he whispered those final instructions. The way he looked at me, not with worry, but with something that looked almost like confidence. Like he knew I would figure it out. Like he had spent his whole life quietly teaching me to be the kind of person who could. I walked out of the courthouse into the September air. Charlotte was golden in the late afternoon light. The trees along Tryon Street were just beginning to turn. I sat on a bench outside and let myself cry. Not the hysterical sobbing Diane had wanted from me. Just quiet, tired tears from a woman who had been holding her breath for 2 years and could finally exhale. Then I wiped my face, took out my phone, and called my forensic accountant. "Start the foreclosure on Lakeview Drive," I said, "and list the Weston Commerce Center for sale. Market rate." Then I called the nonprofit my father had supported for 20 years, the one that built affordable housing for single mothers, and I pledged $500,000 from the estate, because that is what my father would have done. Then I deleted Diane's number, blocked every one of her contacts, and walked to my car. It was a 2019 Honda Civic, nothing fancy. I had bought it used with cash. Diane had mocked that car for 2 years. She told the family it was proof I was broke. She didn't know that I had paid off every property in the estate. She didn't know I had increased the portfolio's value by 40% through strategic acquisitions while she was busy stealing from the operating account. She didn't know that the tiny apartment she laughed about was 2 blocks from the office of the best forensic accounting firm in the Southeast, and I had chosen it specifically so I could walk there at midnight without anyone noticing. She saw a stepdaughter who couldn't handle life. I saw a woman who confused silence with weakness. The car started on the first try. I pulled out of the parking lot, turned onto the highway, and drove toward the apartment I would be moving out of next week. I had already signed the lease on a house in Myers Park, 3 bedrooms, a yard, a kitchen with windows that faced east so I could drink my coffee in the morning light. My father had planted a garden every spring. I was going to plant one too. Some people think revenge is about destruction, about watching someone burn, and maybe part of it is. Maybe there was a moment in that courtroom when I felt something dark and sharp and satisfying twist in my chest as Diane realized she had been outplayed. But the real victory wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the indictment. It wasn't even the look on her face when she understood that I owned her house. The real victory was the garden. The real victory was the morning light through east-facing windows. The real victory was building a life so solid, so rooted, so mine, that no one could ever take it from me again. Diane spent 4 years trying to erase me. She told the family I was an addict. She told the lawyers I was incompetent. She told the judge I had lost my mind. But I was never lost. I was always right here, quiet, patient, counting. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let them believe they've won. Let them get comfortable. Let them get careless. Let them stand up in open court and say the one sentence that proves everything you've been building for 2 years. Because the truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be ready. And I was ready.